A show based on the facts, honesty, the man, the myth, the legend. ChristiTutionalist, Joseph M. Leonard.
Welcome to ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast, aka CTP, in association with TheLibertyBeacon.com, and I am your host, Joseph M. Leonard, and that's Leonard. CTP is your no muss, no fuss, just me, you, and occasional guest type podcast. I really appreciate you tuning in. As Graham Norton would say, let's get on with the show! Welcome back to ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast, everyone. Welcome to the show if you're on BitChute, Brighteon, Rumble, YouTube, at J. Leonard Detroit. Video channels, see the behind the scenes. You can see fellow glasses wearer, William R. Douglas. Welcome to the show, William. How are you today?
Joseph, I'm fantastic. I trust you are as well. I love your shirt.
Oh, thank you.
Love your background image, and thank you for the opportunity to come on your show.
Yeah, I'm glad to have you. And for the benefit of the transcript or the audio, I'm wearing another one of my usual kind of U.S. flag inspired attire. And I say U.S. flag inspired because there's this thing called the U.S. flag code.
Right.
No, I'm not violating. This is an artistic, inspired rendition, inspired by the flag. It's not the flag. It is not a violation. Yep. And you can see William is already. Yep. William has it on his book, a flag. Yeah, you can see on. Hold up the whole book in frame there.
Right.
William, for those looking behind the scenes, hold up the book again. The Sum of All Our Anger, Civil War II, William R. Douglas, which just how weird my brain works. So the first question, before I ask about your background, which is usually the first background, but since I got it in my mind now, the way my brain works, the first thing that came to my mind was Tom Clancy, The Sum of All Fears. Did that inspire this book title at all, or is it just coincidental?
Well, certainly a tip of the hat to a literary giant, Tom Clancy. I messed around with a couple of different titles, and when I thought about, the sum tone of all the book, certainly thought of Clancy's title, but obviously the story is completely different. And adding two words to it makes it a totally different storyline. Last I checked, you can't copyright the sum of all.
Correct. You cannot
do that, so.
You cannot copyright a title. You cannot copyright a phrase. You can trademark a phrase or term, like I have. ChristiTutionalist is indeed trademarked. And after 13 months, finally, the slow asses in D.C., of course, don't do the job you legally can do and serve us people. So 13 months later, I finally got acknowledgement. Yes, it's been officially trademarked.
Yeah.
But when it comes to unconstitutional stuff they want to meddle in, they're right on that.
Yeah. Anyway, as I tossed around ideas about the title, and I started using that phrase, the sum of all our anger, the more I thought about it, I said, this is absolutely perfect because it sums up exactly what is going on around the country now. The sum of all our anger is just, in a place we've never seen before in our lifetime.
It certainly makes sense. So let's backtrack and go to what the first question normally is and should have been, tell us about William R. Douglas. Where were you born? Where are you now? All those gory details, right? How much time in prison did you serve? And
Depends what you consider prison. So I'm a Chicago native my whole life, out in the suburbs. I live northwest of Chicago, about an hour, pretty close to Wisconsin state line. Married, have 6 kids, 8 grandkids, a 9th grandkid on the way. We live in a small town of McHenry, Illinois, population 27,000. And this is my second book. So my first book came out in 2021 and was recognized by a couple of fairly prominent book award contests as a finalist, reader's favorite, and then also the Independent Author Network. That book was called The Death and Resurrection of Baseball. This book, obviously, nothing to do with baseball. So this book I started writing last August or thereabouts, and finished it in April, and went through the whole editing process. And here we are, July 1st, it was published. So, but back to me, I'm a longtime IT person, been involved in the IT field since the 1980s.
Oh, same with me. Same with me. Yeah.
Working for such great companies as EDS, Ross Perot's old company, More Business Forums, IBM, and Sears. I had a very long stint with Walgreens, almost 20 years, in their corporate IT department. And currently I work for the Boeing company.
Interesting. The last 3 things came to mind. First, you mentioned Sears. I'm former Kmart IT.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah, until Sears and Kmart decided to screw us all, merge, and turn into a real estate company because it was more profitable short term to sell everything off than it was to operate as retail. The second thing, going backwards, I wrote down a note, McHenry, Illinois. Unlike Fort McHenry, which my Terror Strikes Coming Soon to City Near You is under the McHenry Press label from Fort McHenry. And, the Star Spangled Banner thing, the patriotic line of books through McHenry Press now. And then I like what you said about it depends on what you consider prison. Then immediately popped in my head, do you remember the Christian rock group Creed?
Oh, yeah.
They had a song, My Own Prison, right? So, yeah, I've been serving life, right?
Right.
The Sum of All Our Anger, Civil War 2.0 is fiction, whereas my friend Mike Gardner's, a.k.a. Savage of Savage Unfiltered, American Political Warfare, Modern Civil War, talks of real issue divisions and current cold Civil War we hope won't go hot. Now, I know you quasi put current issues in, kind of like my Terror Strikes book is historical fiction. In a way, yours is historical fiction also, because you use modern issues as fodder as to how they could spark the fictional story. Yes?
Exactly. So I am a history buff. And there's some history woven in there, pointing back to the first Civil War, and then there's also recent news stories that are woven in there and historically, and the themes in particular are taken and woven into the story, and allowed to percolate for another 35 plus years, and left unaltered. Unfortunately, we have, at least in the book time, the second occurrence of a conflict on American soil.
Yeah, I don't do a scripted show, but I did write some notes. People could see me waving it on the behind the scenes video. So these are kind of now in random order as I jotted notes to spark a question I wanted to ask. As a fellow author, I'm curious. I saw your book is also in hardcover. Almost nobody does that anymore. I'm curious why you felt a hardcover edition was important.
I know the really hardcore bookophiles, they like a hardcover. So it'll be out in August. It's not quite out yet, but it'll be out in August. So yeah. I admittedly on the first book I didn't, there weren't a lot of copies of hardcover sold. Most of them were paperback, and then obviously Kindle or ebooks, and then trailing last was the paperback. So the hardcover. So I'm like, some people still like the hardcover, so it'll be out in August.
Yeah. And then I also jotted down because, again, being a fellow author, I look for things that maybe an average reader just glosses over or ignores. Like you dedicated your book to your wife, Lori, family and friends. And you also acknowledged John Geist, your editor, and Brenda Drake Lesh, is that how it's pronounced? Who did the cover. Do you have a personal connection to them, or are they just hires? Or
John, no, I just recently got acquainted with John via Upwork.com. The editor that I had for the first book was not available to take on the second project. So I had to go out there and look around. I found John via Upwork. Brenda, I had 2 book covers with the baseball book. One, I worked with a guy out in Seattle, and I was pretty insistent I wanted this one particular image on the cover of the book. So he had to work around that. And then at the end of the day, after, I don't know, couple of months or so, realized I had made a mistake. And so I found a graphic artist to conceptualize a redesign of the first book cover. And she hit it out of the park, no pun intended. So I contacted her for the second project, and she came up with this book cover, which, by the way, how do you like the book cover?
Oh, I love it. I think it's a very good design. I like that. And because I spent 3 months, me and McHenry Press, aka also Illuma Phi Media, Michael over there created McHenry Press for my book as the first on his new subsidiary under Illuma Phi Media for a Patriot line of books.
Okay.
We with Lisa, me, Lisa, and Michael went around for 3 months arguing about my Terror Strikes cover because I had envisioned I wanted something unique and different. Yeah. People in publishing don't like unique and different. They like predictable, right? they like, well, we've always done it this way. Let's do it that way.
What's wrong with this font? This font works.
I had envisioned 4 different quadrants with different imagery to represent different aspects of the book in each quadrant. Well, after arguing, I gave in. That wasn't ground that I felt needed. It wasn't a hill to die on, right? But the majority of the main images I felt needed to be in there were incorporated in the shadowy kind of sub-images of my cover. So, yeah, I get it. And sometimes we are not our own best advocate when it comes to a cover, right? Yeah. Someone else says, well, this will really bring eyes to your book. And unlike Martin Luther King Jr. saying we need to judge each other on content, not on our cover, books do get judged by their cover. You don't have a
they
good
do.
cover, they're not picking it up to look at anything else.
Yeah,
So you got to have a good cover.
Yeah.
And so I definitely get that. And another thing before I forget, just kind of going off into left field, the Sum of All Fears, Clancy, I mentioned at the top. Your book has nothing, I'm assuming, I don't know, to do with that Civil War Kirsten Dunst movie that's out.
No, it absolutely not. It takes quite an opposite tack. So I don't know if you saw the Civil War movie in the spring. I did, but I didn't see it until after I had written the last word of the manuscript. I didn't want to have it influence me at all.
Right.
So I saw the movie. It was very disturbing on several levels, which I won't spoil it. I would encourage people to see it. Although one thing I will say is that it's very clear to me, at least watching the movie, that it wasn't a kind of an underhanded attack against conservatives. And they seem to allude that extremists have taken over the White House and most of the country, and that the last two holdouts, California and Texas, combined their military might and come to the rescue. So
yeah,
there's a lot of disturbing elements in there. I think the biggest one was seeing the actual, modern weaponry combat footage on American soil. That was very jarring. And of course, that's in my book in great detail, obviously, but a completely different storyline. But it was very unnerving to see that depicted.
Yeah, I saw the first 20 minutes. I'm a Kirsten Dunst fan, so I mainly saw it because of her. I saw the first 20 minutes. I walked out. I didn't like the way it was presented. I just didn't like the kind of the story perspective through these journalists or supposed journalists, reporters, war correspondents, if you will. I just didn't. One day I will, when it comes on streaming and I could see it for free, I will probably force myself to watch the rest of it because, yes, like you said, I expected it to be a usual woke attack on conservative Hollywood type film. So I felt I needed to see it so I could speak intelligently on it. Unlike a lot of people like this, completely unrelated, like people talking about the Barbie movie who didn't see the Barbie movie, which was actually a pretty even-handed and fun movie. It attacked both left and right. It kind of made fun of everything. Like, I don't want to give spoiler on that, but it attacked the woke DEI, in a sense, in the boardroom, the hypocrisy, right? Like all the males in the boardroom saying, we're a feminist company. We have a woman janitor. I was like, that's hilarious, people. That is hilarious. And it is great that they, no sacred cows. They it was more leftist than, right side humor, but there were no sacred cows. They went at everything. But of course, people who don't see the movie attack it based on their assumptions. At any rate, let me get back to my notes. Like I say, I don't like the script, but once I saw your book and knew I could have you on, I said, I got to write down some notes because I want to make sure to ask you about certain things. Like chapter 1, again, not to give spoilers here. I don't want you to give spoilers. I want people to buy the book, but we want to intrigue them. Chapter 1 begins in the future, and you already alluded to that to a degree. We may not have that much time. I don't want to say when the first chapter begins, but Yeah, the time frame. It could be less, it could be more. The fear is we may have very little time to right the ship and heal our wounds, right?
Yeah, we can talk about the time because it's on the back of the book cover. It talks about
Oh, okay.
so the book time. The first chapter starts in January of 2061, and what has happened is that the prior to the start of the story, a few years earlier, there's two major things that have happened. Three things really. The Electoral College has been abolished. The Supreme Court's been stacked. There's now 13 justices instead of 9. But most importantly of all is that a socialist wave has gone up and down both coasts. So the West Coast, the East Coast have become very heavily socialist.
No, that could never happen. It's not
right?
like we're living that now.
Right?
Yeah.
So what happens is because the Electoral College is gone, well, the middle of the country always gets kind of messed up then, right? So by popular vote, the first ever openly socialist president comes to be elected and is inaugurated in January of 2061. Just prior to the inauguration, the story starts actually in Texas, and Texas has become at that time, even though it's uh, economically powerful now and politically powerful. 35 years from now, Texas becomes extremely powerful. As you know, there's an ongoing flight of talent and capital to Texas right now. And all that obviously adds to their luster and their power. And but they become even more conservative than it is now. And they don't like what has happened to the country. And they're like, you know what? We're strong enough. We're just going to again become our own nation. As recall Texas's early history in the middle of the 19th century, Texas started out as a republic after winning their war of independence against Mexico. And so the story starts with the new president of the Republic of Texas, who was formerly just a few weeks ago the governor of the state of Texas, but now they've declared their independence, they're sovereign, and he's greatly concerned about what's going to happen in the immediate future.
Yeah.
So,
all right. Well, I don't want to give too many spoilers. I think that's enough of a tease to get people interested. So let's just snip that with the scissors right there.
We'll do that.
But let's jump ahead to chapter 4. But I'm going to kind of take you out of the book. Chapter 4 is called Choosing Sides, but putting the book aside for general discussion, rather than blue states, red states, and red. It's really the divide, blue and red counties, because there's a lot of blue counties in red states, and vice versa. Like California, there are red counties, very solid red conservative counties. If something happens like a civil war, may not be actual states versus states, but intrastate enclaves against others in same states, let alone interstate battling. Addressing that or my conjecture alone, or can touch on, give spoilers if you really, really want, but I'm trying to avoid that. You go about in the book if willing to give the spoilers, because really, again, we're not blue-red state, we're blue-red county, and the intra-state battles make the state blue or red as we define them.
Yeah. Well, I'll give you an example. So the state of Illinois, which has been in the hands of Democratic state legislature, the governorship, and of course,
mainly because of Chicago.
Correct. Right. And of course, in Chicago, a bulwark of the Democratic Party for generations, actually.
Which is Cook County. Cook County, making my point about county to county within state. Yep.
Yeah. But I think, at least in my storyline, to start out with, whoever controls the state politically in the capital and the major cities, at least initially, has control over the entire state.
And their National Guard.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. And their National Guard. And so, obviously, as you rightfully point out, there are counties that are deeply red, counties that are deeply blue, counties that are purple. And I think eventually, if, God forbid, there were to be a conflict, you would see things begin to devolve down to these, county levels. I know there's a group out west of county sheriffs that are constitutionalists, and they have their own group, and they're very clear in their statements that they will preserve and protect and defend the Constitution against all enemies, foreign and domestic. And that very phrase is used in the book as well quite frequently. So, but yeah, initially, especially in the book, there's a big moment of decision where the states have to decide what side they're going to fall on, either to go down this path of socialism or to continue to hold on what's been labeled the old way, which would be our constitutional republic.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Wham Radio, 1600 AM and 92.7 FM is your conservative flamethrower. Weekdays, Steve Gruber starts things off at 6 a.m. Gruber gives his perspective on the issues of the day. At 9 a.m., Glenn Beck blazes the airwaves with his nationally syndicated program. From noon to 3, it's Dennis Prager. At 3 o'clock, it's Wham's own Therone X. On the Edge, Therone tells it exactly as he sees it. At 6, it's The Dana Show, your conservative alternative. At 8, don't miss Joe Pags. Weekends are filled with conservative talk as well. Fingers Malloy, Thomas LeDuc, The Abolitionists Roundtable, A Moment of Clarity with Pastor Rick, Your American Heritage with Ed Bondarenka, Dave Janda's Operation Freedom, and Dick Kupke's Trigger Talk. You can even get links to Wham podcasts from Dave, Dick, and of course Therone, all from their pages on our website, whamradio.com. Keep it locked on Wham Radio, 1600 AM and 92.7 FM in southeastern Michigan, and whamradio.com anywhere in the world.
Al, I like that. Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. I'm glad you laid it out succinctly. A good the underlying basis of how that comes about. Well, as a fellow author and writer, I want to go kind of more technical here and hope we don't lose the audience. But because I had a bad review on my Terror Strikes book because the person, I didn't like it. There wasn't enough dialogue. It's like, well, I never said anywhere it was a dialogue heavy book. You made an assumption. That's your preference. And I had another person kind of give a counter review to the reviewer saying, well, that ain't his fault you made a bad assumption. What about the substance of the book? But that leads me to indeed ask, whereas I'm more narrative style writer, you indeed, like Angel Giacomo, if I'm pronouncing her name and right, and who does a military book. I'm drawing a blank now on. It's a whole series. You can look her up anyway. Yeah. She's mentioned in my How to Write a Book and Get It Published, It's Tips and Techniques. But at any rate, I'm going down this road because indeed, you're more indeed of a dialogue writer as a driver of the story. Was that by choice, or that's just kind of how you are?
Yeah, probably just the way I am. So I do like to, often I'll start out a chapter with a with a narrative, kind of setting the stage for the chapter, and then get into the dialogue. So one thing that I wanted to do with this story was I didn't want it to have it be narrowly focused on a couple of people. And you see that in the Civil War movie we talked about a few moments ago. I wanted this to be kind of a broad brushstroke, kind of an epic almost. I don't know if you ever recall the movie Gettysburg from I think it came out back in the early '90s, but this has nothing to do with Gettysburg, but just the feel of Gettysburg, the scope of it, the sheer number of characters. You see that in The Longest Day as well. The sheer number of characters and their various involvement and the various pieces of the puzzle that make up the story. And so I wanted to do something similar. There's obviously characters on both sides of the aisle depicted in the story. Especially President Cyrus, who's the socialist in the the antagonist of the story, and then a heroine of the story is Governor Mary Whitfield, the governor of Oklahoma in the year 2061. And she's a very conservative, diehard constitutionalist, and then there are other characters. So in the whole unveiling of the plot line as it goes along, as you read the story arc, you come into contact with various characters from all different sides, civilian and military. Bishop King is a major character in the story, and his son Deshaun, and other generals come into play, and politicians, and because you talk about, God forbid, a second Civil War in American style. I mean, it wouldn't just be just one individual or a small group of individuals. You would have this broad spectrum of all the major players that would be involved in such a nightmare.
Well, even our original Revolutionary War. I mean, we think in terms of Washington and Jefferson and Benedict Arnold, but I mean, you look at the signers of the Declaration. Yeah, they were few, but that doesn't tell the whole story of the thousands and thousands. Although, yes, indeed, it's like in Germany, it is said only like 7% of Germans were indeed Nazi socialists, right? But look how that turned out, right? In our Revolutionary War, it is said it was really a pretty indeed small percentage of our society that really felt the firmness of the conviction to break away, but yet the small amount prevailed. But it isn't 50 people. It's a whole lot of other people. And you try to portray that grander scope, but still, indeed, it is still a small number of characters that really drive and pull other people into the process. Now, also staying on an author technical kind of aspect, you didn't have someone write a foreword. There's no afterword. However, you have an author thoughts section, which I thought was really wonderful and unique. And you and I are kind of alike in this, that my Terror Strikes book being historical fiction, I have a section that I give additional links to indeed current event stories so that you can. The book could have been 800 pages. I only wanted it to be 250, so it could be affordable. But here are additional things you can look at, kind of like on a DVD director's cut, other materials you can look at. And you have storyline touch point links also. So we kind of are both on that same wavelength there. Give us the genesis and the thought behind that. Because again, we're on that same page so far as doing that.
Yeah, so the author thoughts part at the end of the book is really just obviously self-explanatory, my personal thoughts, but more has to do with the fact that among one of the goals of the novel is to have it serve as a deterrent by getting all Americans, regardless of their political persuasion, to take a step back and say, how do we avoid anything even remotely approaching this scenario? And so there's lessons there. The other thing would be, the story touch points. I was very, very cautious that when I put those in there, I wanted to use news sources other than Fox News. I mean, I like Fox News. I'm a Fox News fan, but I wanted the book to have broad appeal. And so I chose other, mainstream media sources to put in the back of the book that references either very closely or loosely some of the parts of the plot. And one thing, one of the more telling ones was this New York Times opinion piece by two law professors, one from Harvard and one from Yale. This New York Times opinion piece where they write this joint article saying that the Constitution is broke and can't be fixed. I'm like, what? I'm like, wow, that wasn't from Fox. That was in the New York Times. And so I put that in there for, again, these other non-Fox news sources to highlight that these stories aren't just, fabrications of some conservative media outlet. These are real stories. And they're out there, but a lot of people miss them because a lot of people don't really get their news anymore from news sources. They get them from, Facebook.
Social media.
Social media.
Yes.
Alternative quote unquote news sources. And so those are in there very poorly. On a Kindle version, it's obviously convenient because you can just click the link and it will take you right to it. With a paperback version, you would just have to type in the story heading that is in the back of the book and put it in quotes in Google or your favorite search engine.
Yeah, I cheat.
And you'll find them. You'll find them.
Yeah, I cheat a bit. I use Google used to have a link shortener,
right?
But they don't offer that anymore. I am a paid user of tinyurl.com.
Yeah.
They are a nice link shortener. And when and where possible, I try to, in the book, Terror Strikes and others, in my ChristiTutionalist politics books also, there are cross-reference links in there. So I use tinyurl.com to try to make links shorter for people to get to things. But I like that concept, author thoughts. In my next fictional book, I may steal that as a section header.
Yeah. let me tell you, share two things with your listening audience regarding the touch points articles that are in the back of the book. So I'll just do two of them, but they're very important ones because they're very they appear very importantly in the novel. The first one from April 11th, New York Post, Seattle Dance Squad says they were told American flag shirts made audience members feel triggered and unsafe. Yeah, and this was an event in Seattle, and this dance squad was told they had to hide their shirts. Well, obviously, you see the cover of the book, you see the American flag in the upper right, and you see this weird-looking flag on the lower left. And so that story ties in directly with the opening chapter of the book and also the book cover. So second story, in the Chicago Tribune from April the 10th this year, University of Wisconsin students call for removal of Abraham Lincoln statue on Madison campus. Now, think about that one, right? Dr. King speaks on the steps of the Lincoln Memorial in 1963. And so you have, the hero of the Civil War, President Lincoln, but for some reason now he's on the outs with the extreme left, and they want to take his statue down. And by the way, a state that was a free state. So
yeah. Oh, I hear you. It's the same thing too. They're attacking Jefferson and David Barton, a great historian, has a book dedicated just on the idiocy and stupidity and the sliming, the smearing of Jefferson.
Yeah.
Like the 1619 Project made up out of whole cloth spin. Barton goes into the actual evidenced, factual, and lots of links to source to it to prove to you he's telling you the reality of Jefferson. Yes, he did have slaves. That's a fact. But the rest of it made up of smear attacks out of that to discredit Jefferson. His great book, I recommend that. But author thoughts, I think, are important. And like in my next fictional book, indeed, I may use author thoughts. And one of the first things will be, this was a fictional book. People make assumptions. Right? Just because you have a character say something in the book doesn't mean that they are you. Right? Correct. Like I get that all the time. My characters are fictional. They take arbitrary stances apart from some of what would be my stance to make the book interesting, right? If it's all one thought, if it's all your thinking, it isn't a good read. It would be rather boring. Oh, I think I saw somebody go by in the background there. So let's start to wrap it up. I do want to go to your death and resurrection of baseball, because that ties well with me and my show, as I have a baseball sub-thread in my Terror Strikes book through it all. So that was another aspect of you, is that, I like this guy already, because, because of course, coming out of 9/11, George W. Bush in that pitch at Yankee Stadium signaled to the planet, you didn't win. We are returning to as much normalcy as we can. So I do more on baseball, but that was the main emphasis of why, well, there's got to be a baseball thread in this terrorism book because of that. And I saw, again, your death and resurrection of baseball. What was your impetus to write that? Just a baseball fan, or?
Yeah, I've been a baseball fan all my life. Grew up playing sandlot ball in the 60s, and that's where I really honed my skills playing the sport. I still play. I play on a Monday night church softball league still, and I'm 65 years old. So, but I had read a story. Oh gosh, this has to be probably like 15 years ago, because I'm a Civil War buff as well as a World War II buff. And I was reading a story about the Civil War and games that kids used to play before the first Civil War that became extinct. I thought, that's interesting. And it's just kind of stuck in my gray matter. And then I started hearing and reading and experiencing the decline in the popularity of baseball, and I'd always been challenged. Oh, you write pretty good. You should write a book. So I just had this thought come to me one day. Well, what would happen if, a major sport like baseball were to die? What would that be like? And, how would it be found again? And so that set me on a path to writing my first novel, The Death and Resurrection of Baseball, Echoes from the Distant Past. And it's a story about a 12-year-old boy 100 years after the end of a second Civil War, who rediscovers a relic with a tie back to baseball, but he doesn't know it yet. And it just sets off a chain of events that leads to him rediscovering the sport of baseball and reintroducing it back to America that's still healing from this horrible war from 100 years in the past. So people could almost read it, even though it came before. They could almost read it as a sequel to The Sum of All Our Anglo-Civil War too. You could. It is a loosely tied. The Civil War book is a very, very loosely tied prequel to the baseball book. So there's two characters that are in the Civil War book that get mentioned in the baseball book, and that's Jackson and Deshaun King. So, but the baseball book's a very wholesome book. It's meant for young adults on up. It's gotten great reviews. Like I say, it was recognized by a couple of book award contests. So, the Civil War book, parental notice. I would not have grammar or even middle school age kids read this. High school kids would be okay. There is a warning in the front, though. There is some language in the Civil War book, but there are no F-bombs, nor is there any misuse of our Lord's name.
I do that in terror strikes too.
Yeah.
You're talking terrorism, you're talking military war on terror.
Yeah.
You'd expect a lot of F-bombs, but
Yeah.
I purposefully clean. There's one damn in the whole book because I wanted it to be all ages. So indeed, junior high could read it because they're being indoctrinated and not getting a lot of the history, the historical aspect of my book, which is why I wanted to make sure. But yeah, the language kind of makes it more realistic to today's environment. But so I wait.
And I have to say, I really struggled with what to do with that because, like, you talk about soldiers in the heat of combat and everybody else, in the heat of what is going on, the civilians, and it's like, well, they're not going to all sit around and say, "Oh, fudge," or whatever. But at the same time, I didn't want to have it be something where it was just, cover to cover. It just fills with it.
Oh, too many comedians nowadays rely on F-bombs every other sentence. It's not humor. It's not funny. It's not creative. It's just purposefully out there to.
So I was. Let me finish. So when I was doing the manuscript, when I would come to that point, I was literally putting an underbar in for a substitution because I was still undecided in my mind. What am I going to do with this? And so when the editor got it, he's like, "What's with these underbars?" So I explained to him my predicament, and because I am a Christ follower, I'm a deacon in the church, and although full disclosure, I'm guilty of using every word that was in there that I didn't want to put in there.
Me too.
So,
Me too.
I'm just a sinner saved by grace. But he goes, well, you really had to put these in here because it makes it realistic. And it's too weird just to have an underbar. I thought about, what if I have a black bar that just says censored, but that just seemed corny. So then I'll have a compromise. I'm not going to put the F-bomb in there, and I'm not going to misuse our Lord's name. And I think it was a good balance. So it makes the story real, especially in the combat moments.
Yeah.
And so, but I did thought, well, I'm going to put that parental warning in the front of it.
Yeah, and that's why in Terror Strikes also, I shied away from dialogue. That was in a way to avoid using those words, because indeed, if there were a lot of dialogue, you would expect to see it, like especially in the flashback chapter where there's a reference to Vietnam and soldiers. I would imagine there'd be a lot of cursing normally. Then also I have my character address vulgarity and the use of quote unquote what we adopt or accept and consider swear words these days. So that was indeed my compromise also. So I address it and while avoiding it. So let's wrap things up. Where peeps can reach out to you, I know author WilliamRDouglas.com, but do you have a wiki page or an IMDb page like somebody was kind enough to create for me? I was so flattered. I'm actually on IMDb, even though I was only in one local low-key movie ever. I've never been in a movie other than that as an extra. Where do people find you other than author WilliamRDouglas.com?
The best way is through author WilliamRDouglas.com. There's links to my social media presence as well. there's links to the book sale on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and then you can just go to Amazon and Barnes and Noble, just look up the book title. It's pretty easy, The Sum of All Our Anger, and you'll immediately find it. So yeah, you can contact me through the website. I've got an author little author page that's set up through Amazon as well. So yep.
As should everyone who publishes on Amazon. And as I say, I'm not a Bezos fan, but reality is reality. 80% of all books are sold through Amazon today. You've got to be on Amazon.
Yep, absolutely. Absolutely.
All right. Well, thank you, William R. Douglas. Why did you close it? I go Joseph M. Leonard as my author name because there is a Joseph Leonard that's also an author. So I had to put my middle name in there. Was it a conscious decision, or why are you using William R. Douglas, or is it because William and Douglas are too generic of a name you needed the middle? I'm just curious.
Yeah, so it's a pseudonym. So my first name's Douglas, and my dad's name is William R. So it's a pseudonym.
Okay.
It has a nice ring to it too.
Okay.
I'll not mention my real name. I'll keep my privacy private.
Yes. Yeah.
It's definitely a pseudonym. Yeah.
Yeah. You decided for whatever reasons, and I get it. I've been a public figure for a long time, so I just use. But as a public figure, I have to use blocking software even on my home phone because I get death threats. I get death threats. So yeah, I got to use a spam blocker to block, the death threats and all that stuff too. But I went with my real name. But believe me, I understand the desire for a nom de plume to avoid some of that. So I'm glad that popped into my head to ask there. I didn't have that as a note to ask. I just last minute thought.
Yeah, it's all good. It's all good.
All right. Well, thanks for joining the show. Appreciate it. You take care and God bless.
Thanks for having me on, Joseph. It's been a fun time. Thank you.
Thank you for having tuned in for ChristiTutionalist Politics Show. If you haven't already, please check out my primary internationally available book, Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you. Available anywhere books are sold. If you have locally run bookstores still near you, they can order it for you, or autographed copies are available online direct from me via terrorstrikes.info/shop. Be sure to check out more about today's discussion at thelibertybeacon.com, where my articles drop every Saturday. And let me remind, over time, the fancy high production items will come. But for now, for starters, it's just you as a very appreciated listener by me. All substance, no fluff, no fancy high production intro or insert, at least yet. Just straight to key discussion points. A show that looks at a variety of topics, mostly politics, through a Christian U.S. constitutionalist lens. So again, thank you from the bottom of my heart. Take care. God bless. Like and subscribe to ChristiTutionalist Politics Podcast and share episodes. We need your help.
It is a myth that terrorism stopped during COVID. Unfortunately, mainstream media opted to prioritize pandemic hysteria over promoting all news. Terrorism continues. Simply hoping that it doesn't affect you is not a strategy. The new book, Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you, featured on The Author Show, is now available in paperback from bookstores, online, or as an ebook exclusively through Amazon Kindle. Terror Strikes, coming soon to a city near you by Joseph M. Leonard. Order today.